Welcome to AquaBrainTV. My name is Andrew. On tonight's show, we're going to be talking about gardening and urban gardening, to be specific. He's an AV technician. That's how I met him. But he's turned his yard into a bountiful garden. Welcome to the show, Anthony Geyman. How you doing?
Hey, I'm real good, man. Thanks for having me on the show.
All right. So, urban gardening, you are, in my eyes, a little bit of a inspiration.
I don't know all about that, but I do it. Yeah, if that's what you mean. It's a real passion of mine.
I mean, it. So I show my wife
Uh-huh.
pictures of your process. So I go and I say, look, this is what's possible. And she goes, I don't know if I want to get rid of the grass. But but definitely an inspiration for me. And I've done a few raised beds and I'm just starting, and I also got to kind of ease my wife into it.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, I'm glad to hear it. Yeah, I hope that that's the case, more than just what I get out of it. I do hope that, just doing something that you love and that you're passionate about encourages other people to get into it, especially something that I believe can kind of change the world.
So what was your motivation to start transforming your yard?
Yeah, it was pretty pure and simple. It wasn't this like grandiose ideology that I've kind of constructed it into. It was that I had just graduated from college, which is like, gosh, it's like 12 years ago now,
Oh, wow.
and I had been an academic up until that point my entire life. I was really good in school. I got good grades. I had this like degree, and then I had no like practical skills. I was living in a community out of Parkland, Washington, with a bunch of really interesting people from a lot of different walks of life. Not all of them went to college. Some of them were like tradespeople and mechanics and carpenters and builders. And I was looking at myself and I'm like, man, I'm so unbalanced. Like I'm only capable of doing one kind of thing. And it just made me realize that I wanted to learn a trade, like a skill, something that it sounds silly to say, but it's like, well, if the world were to end in the conventional sense of how we understand it to be, meaning civilization, right? If we
Internet.
lost all that technology, like what would I do?
Right.
And I'm like, well, what would I do? Well, not much back then, but I got kind of interested in food because I was living in this great little house. I had 6 other roommates. It's like your typical post-college, like, we crammed as many people as we could into one space, and we had potluck dinners and music. And one of the previous tenants has started a garden on that property,
Oh,
and it had been kind of left remiss for about a year or two. So it was pretty well overgrown. There was like the bones of something that had clearly once been there. And I'm like, all right, I'm gonna literally get in there and get my hands dirty and see what I can do. And I got a couple books. I had a couple friends who were working as like interim hands on a farm. So I talked to them a little bit about what growing food looks like and how the process is. Mostly, I just kind of jumped into it. I didn't have any experience or expertise. I just had enough interest and passion to say, I'm going to give it a try. And it all kind of grew from there.
cool. Well, very cool. And then I know you from working audiovisual.
That's right.
And so
Yeah.
that was that's another skill or another trade that you learned as well. Are you still doing AV in town? Is that your
Yeah, I am. I found that I really like that kind of work. It's interesting because there's so many things that I do on my own free time that I'm really passionate about that are very like natural. I spend time outdoors. I volunteer for backpacking groups. I like to grow food and spend time in my own yard. And then I go to work in this very like often sterile environment. It's very like corporate media,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
extremely technology driven. I have to pull my hair back and clean the beard up and do all this stuff. But again, just getting back to that idea of like, I think it keeps me balanced. Like, I think that it means that I don't go down any one road too far. And I have this nice uh, accumulation of skills over time as a result.
Right. And I know from working with you on set and stuff, you're very even keeled. And I think that helps too when you're working with your hands, when you've got
Yeah.
that outlet, right? So like
Yeah, for the most part. I think I yelled at you once. Just
well,
once.
I mean, I don't know. It's possible I deserved it at the time. Who
Who
knows?
knows? But yeah, I know what you mean. I do feel like as a hobby, and everybody's got something that they like to do in their downtime. Gardening is very relaxing for me. I can spend hours of, most of my days off outside in the sunshine with my hands in the dirt. There's some research to suggest that that's literally physiologically good for you, that you pick up all this bacteria and that helps your body kind of balance out better. I don't know about that. I just know that it really makes me feel good, when I'm doing it.
Yeah. So we mentioned earlier that you've transformed your yard into a cornucopia. I don't know if that's the right word, but a
Yeah,
bountiful.
kind of without the basket, although there are
Yeah.
some baskets around here. Yeah, so I've got about, I'm in kind of the inner city of Tacoma here. And I mean, I've only got 7,000 square feet on the property, and the house takes up about 1,200 of that. So I've got, give or take, 5,000 square feet to play with on the property. And I've taken it and I've done a couple different things. I wanted to do the raised bed gardening. I think that works really well for urban systems, because you get to bring in fresh, really usable, potable soil, and you put it to work right away. I also wanted to try to build up some of the soil as well. So I did kind of a 3 systems approach. I have now 14 4x8 raised beds, which seems
Wow.
crazy, but that's definitely what I got.
That's a lot.
I have a 8 by 20 foot greenhouse with an indoor 8 by 8 grow space as well for all of my starts and any like hot tropical vegetables, peppers and sweet potatoes and things like that. And then I cultivated a perennial kind of more permaculture style urban forest out front with some trees and bushes, and that's been going for the last 5 years. It's really starting to mature, and I'm happy with it. It's very based on like mulching things together, allowing things to go to seed, kind of letting it do its own organic process, and then interseeding just enough to plug some food in here and there. But mostly it's a perennial, meaning it comes back every single year.
That is very cool. Are you finding that you're able to fill most of your nutritious requirements with what your yard provides?
It's supplemental. I always like to say it's more like a kitchen garden in the, like, in the homestead sense of the word, where it's like when you get down to it, even in the best case scenario, it takes almost an acre for
Mm.
a unit, like a home, to produce all the food that it needs, even with like our modern technology, our really enhanced growing methodologies. Like it's a lot of food that, and a lot of calories that we have to generate. But when you talk about nutrients, it's like micronutrients and minerals and vitamins and things that we actually don't need a whole lot of. Calories we need a bunch of. Nutrients we just need little bits along the way. You can get most of the nutrients you need, especially in Washington State, throughout most of the course of the year. So I mean, I find that I eat out of my garden all year long. Certainly in the summertime is when I'm pretty much buying no vegetables from the store.
That's fantastic.
Right now we're in January. I've got some stuff out there. I've got some root vegetables and some potatoes and things that I'm storing over the winter and still eating off of those. I still got plenty of like perennial herbs and then some greens and things, but for the most part, I'm just kind of dialing up for the season. So right now, I mean, I'm just like anyone else. Like when I don't have the food available here, I go to the store and I try to make the best decisions I can for the agricultural system there. But I think during the summertime is probably the time that I'm really getting most of my food from the garden, at least vegetable wise, and fruits.
So do you have you gotten into fermentation or any other microgreens or anything like that?
Yeah, it's interesting. So, it's like with food, like culture, you get into this thing, you're like, I want to grow all this food and it's fun and it's interesting. You get all these interesting varietals. And then there's so much work that goes into just growing the damn stuff. And by the time you have it, you're like, oh shit, yeah, I gotta harvest it and preserve it and and then keep it and then have the
Yeah.
space for it. I mean, it's a full-time amount of time to do these things. And I'm only one person and I have a full-time job working in AV. So Yes, yeah, fermenting's a really nice way to go. I really love pickling as well. I think the preservation methodologies that work best for you are the ones that you have time for. A lot of people can. I like to dehydrate things. It just depends on, I think, what kind of availability you have energy wise and time wise, and whether it just happens to line up with when all your damn tomatoes are ready. It can be really tricky sometimes.
Yeah, so I was wondering, did you, so I know you've kind of learned along the way. Was that those sorts of canning and pickling and fermenting, and I guess pickling and fermenting are similar.
Similar,
Um,
yeah, a little
but
different.
is that something that you were like, oh no, I've got all these tomatoes. Now what am I going to do with them? I better learn to do this. Or did you prepare? Were there pepper, ugh, were there preparation steps that you took?
Yes and no. I mean, you're not wrong. It's like sometimes you just have an abundance. I think it was like 2 years back that I'm like, I want to grow bok choy, and I'm like, I'm gonna eat bok choy, and it turns out I put like a whole bed of bok choy in, and I maybe along the way before they started to mature, I had eaten like 4 of the 37 bok choy plants or something that was in that bed, and I'm like, oh yeah, I didn't eat that much bok choy, like.
Right.
So I decided that I was gonna just kind of ferment it in the same way that you would like a kraut, and I think that that's what you do. The garden can be intentional, but then it also like forces you to adapt to what it's doing. And so you make these decisions and they literally cultivate, and then you have new decisions to be made from what you've done. And the truth is there's still a good bit of the food that I grow out there that never hits my table or my kitchen. It doesn't get preserved, and I just kind of have to live with that because that's the constraints of what I've got going on. There's lots of animals that eat food out there too, birds and squirrels and little bugs and things. So it's like, I think I lose about 30% of what I grow. And I've kind of come to terms with just being okay with that. But
Yeah.
to answer your question, yeah, it's a little bit of both. It's intentionality, and then like adjusting with the time that I have to be like, oh crap, I have to do this thing if I really want it. It's like you spend all this time on those tomatoes. They take 160 days usually to grow, and you got all this fruit. It's like, yeah, you want to save that because it's a good bite, it's a delicious flavor.
Yeah.
You want that in the winter time, but it means you got to put in the time in September to take a whole day and can tomatoes or freeze them or dehydrate them or whatever you want to do. And it sounds simple, but it's a lot of work to just take a whole day out of your life and say, yeah, I'm just going to do this.
This is canning day.
Right,
This
this
is
is
pickling.
canning day. And when you're one person, it feels like a lot. I've been really lucky in that I have people who get inspired or just interested in the garden. They'll come around and they'll offer up some of their help. I have people who are better at preserving foods than me too, who I will lean on, and they'll kind of help me get some of this stuff going when it's just like I just don't have the time to do it. And so they'll pitch in a bit, and then we'll just kind of split up some of that food that way. So it's like if they're committing some time, then they keep some of the food, and it's a good trade-off.
Yeah. Is that, have you found that you're meeting new people because you're like, oh, I want to learn how to anaerobically ferment. So A, I need to buy the right equipment, and B, I need to talk with somebody. I better make a friend. Um, are you finding that you're meeting and making new friends through certain avenues when it comes to things like fermenting or pickling or canning that you
Yeah,
didn't
gosh,
have
you're giving me this
before?
idea. I'm like, we should have like a social networking for preserving food. I don't know what we call it, but that would be awesome, right? To answer your question, no, not specifically, but I have found that the garden and the space, we host a lot of our community who then brings people into our land and our house and our home and our garden. And I do find that the garden is a great conversation topic. It is something that brings out something that I'm passionate about very, very like physically. So it's like when people come to visit, they're like, gosh, I love the garden. Either I do this or I want to do this. And it's that immediate kind of conversation, and we have something to latch onto right away that kind of connects us and makes us feel a little more, I guess, personal would be the thing. So I would say that I've met people, and I've grown closer to people in my community through the garden, but no, not specifically like I've sought people out to be like, man, I got all this cabbage. Who wants to make some kraut? You know?
Right. Yeah. Well, so I noticed, and I asked that because I noticed that was some of the way that you built all your, what you said, 17 beds.
Yeah.
You had work parties.
Yes, yeah, and that is real. Yeah, so you're not wrong there. So it's like when I moved into this property, I actually got a ton of help from a buddy of mine. His name's Tyler Zlatkis. He's a carpenter. He grew up building things. You know, he's a very like mechanically minded engineer person. And I'm like, man, I just bought this house. Like, I don't know shit, you know. And so he and I built the greenhouse. You know, he helped me kind of like lay down some of the ideas of how to get it like how to get the electrical to it. We did watered systems and things, and it was just like it was great to learn from him and learn from his expertise to let me do that. I got a lot of help building the garden beds because most of it is just literally moving earth in the form of wood and a lot of dirt, right? And so it's like I can do that, but it's going to take me a really long time. So yeah, we've gotten in the habits of when we need that extra bit of effort, just reaching out to the community, and there's usually people who have spent time in the garden or spent time on a farm and they just don't have the outlet for it. And so they actually are genuinely excited to pop
Right.
in and help out. And, you know, we'll crack some beers, we'll barbecue some food, we'll hang out. And it feels just like a get together with the work involved.
And then you go out the next day and you're like, all right,
Yeah.
hey, progress.
Yeah. It's fun because, you know, it's like every year the garden grows, not just in the sense of what's growing in it, but the space kind of evolves and it changes. And I've been here for 6 years, and it's really interesting to watch everything take a new form every year. It's exciting because it means that I should suspect that it's going to take a new form this year, and I just don't know what it is yet.
If you had to start this again, brand new,
Mhm.
what are some lessons that you've learned along the way that are going to set you up for success right off the bat?
Okay, yeah, I'll take that in two different ways because what I hear there is what would I do differently, having learned everything that I know, and then maybe what would I recommend someone else just knows if they're starting from where I was, you know, 10 years ago.
Excellent.
Um, for someone who's just starting into it, I think the biggest thing to know is that you're gonna make mistakes, and the trick is really the resiliency of not letting those mistakes, you know, what would be the word, demoralize you, because I think I've probably killed at least 30% of every plant I've ever grown in the grand scheme of things, meaning that, you know, you're not, it's growing plants isn't just one thing. Growing plants is thousands of things that you're learning all at once. And it's, you know, it's water, it's plant temperament, it's soil, it's understanding how to construct and how to time and how to manage, and it's a lot of stuff. I mean, there's a science to it all, as well as like a very kind of like natural art form that comes with it as well. It grows into your lifestyle, but it can be very methodical as well. And I would say start small. You know, it's like do something that is definitely like within your wheelhouse. You know, even if it's just one raised bed, I think that that's the way to approach it and really get that down. You know, it's better to grow one really good raised bed than three really poor ones. You can get the same amount of production out of doing a third of it right instead of all of it, you know, slightly off. Um, for me personally, I think that I would like to have a lot more established perennials, which would mean that I need more space. And what I mean by that is like trees, both fruits and nuts, berry bushes, rhubarbs, asparaguses, things that are not just native to the environment, but genuinely fit into my lifestyle in the way that they are constantly producing without a ton of intervention. Now, intervention helps them produce more heartily, but they kind of do their own things, whether you're constantly attending to them or not. You know, there's a little bit of intercession that happens there, but not a ton. And then I would continue to do my vegetable garden, but it would be nice to not do the raised bed, simply just have a space that's kind of cut out and ready to go, because there are methodologies that I would like to utilize that I can't with raised beds.
What would some of those be?
Grow biointensive is a methodology that combines systems of both French intensive growing. This is close pattern, like leaves growing into each other because they're planted so closely together. It creates like a cloche for the soil bed. It helps preserve moisture. And part of that process means really highly constructed soil that's both like loamy and not tilled. So it's a no-till methodology. It means what's called double digging down into the ground. And for that, I need to literally have access to the soil underneath the beds. With the raised beds, I can't get down in there to properly turn the soil and continue the cycle of decomposition to keep the nutrient flow solid in there.
Gotcha.
That's a lot of technical stuff, but it is straightforward once you know what you're doing. It's just, again, you read a book and you're like, oh man, this seems like the way to go. I want to do this,
Yeah. How do I apply that to what I already have? Oh,
Exactly.
Because I got.
And the truth is sometimes you can't, and that's okay. Like most of what I do now is kind of like hen picking what I find to be the best things from different schools of thought and methodologies based on my environment and my time, my committal level. And it's like cutting myself some slack, knowing that it can't be perfect, but everything that I am doing at least is a positive contribution, right?
Are you finding that you're not growing certain things because you just don't, you end up like your bok choy? Are you finding that you're like, okay, maybe I'll put a couple in because I didn't mind that a little bit, but I'm not gonna do half a bed of bok choy again? Or
maybe I don't need okra and eggplant and and these things that I don't regularly eat anyways, that are very temperamental and hard to grow. That was a lesson that I had learned along the way. And it's like, man, it'd be cool to grow things, and it's good to have the interesting, food that like makes you excited for the season. But not to let it be the totality of what you're doing. A kitchen garden really addresses like, well, what do I use on a regular basis? For me, it's roots, it's turnips and carrots and beets and parsnips, radishes, potatoes, sweet potatoes. And I'm like, all right, that's easy, and then it's greens. And I have like 4 or 5 or 6 different varietals of greens that kind of cycle through the garden. It's your legumes and your peas and tomatoes and peppers. And you're like, well, what do I buy when I go to the store? It's like, I don't always buy eggplants. I don't always buy okra or bok choy, or I buy these kind of like core ingredients, onions. I grow like 600 onions every year. And it seems silly. Onions are so cheap, but the whole idea is to intercede on something that I'm actually, I'm using in abundance.
Yeah, you're using
like that's 600 onions that didn't have to be shipped to me. It just came out of my backyard, right?
And you're in some control, a lot of control, and
you can trust what's going into the food. But for me, it's just like, it's just knowing what I would use on a regular basis, so that I do use it, so that it isn't wasted. That all the water and the nutrients that goes into the soil to make that plant grow isn't just decomposed back into place, and it doesn't just feed the birds. It's okay to feed the birds sometimes, but it shouldn't be grown for that purpose, because you are putting and using resources to get it to the point of consumption. So you ought to consume it. It's the same principle of hunting. You ought not go hunting just for fun. But if you do kill an animal, it's good to use as much of that animal as you can. It's a healthy, like, sustainable ideology, I would say.
You live in a very wet climate.
Yeah, we do. Western Washington, it can rain quite a bit.
So how do you deal with water management?
Yeah, so for me, part of water management comes with proper soil composition. Not to get like into the nitty gritty of what it means for soil, but in essence, there's like 3 main structures of soil. Either it's sandy, or it's clay, or it's right in the middle where we call loam, where the soil literally absorbs. Sand will just let all the water pass through. Clay won't let anything through, but loamy soil, the stuff that you see when you like crack into a bag of potting soil and it's like rich and black and kind of fluffy, and if you get it wet, it kind of puffs up a little bit. It's literally absorbing the water. So it's like in a high like water environment like ours, where we can get kind of inundated a little bit once in a while, those structures of soil will go a long way towards ensuring that the water that does come hits the soil bed and is evenly distributed. It's not just sitting on top, like drowning the plants. It doesn't just get locked into the roots and rot them out. It kind of distributes very evenly across the course. For the most part, I don't water at all until, end of spring through first of fall. We have enough rain, like consistent rainfall, especially in the springtime and usually in the late fall, and I don't have to worry about it. outside of those times, I just set up, you know, simple irrigation systems. It's funny, I tried all of these different things again with experimentations, rainbird and drip systems and like soaker hoses. And the thing that works best, it's not a perfect solution, but it does do everything decently. It's just one of those good old fashioned like fan ones, you know, that covers like 60 feet, and it just does this in the whole backyard and the whole front yard. I have 2 time systems. And, you know, there's limitations to what we call top down, you know, where the water's coming from the top and it's hitting all the leaves, and it sometimes causes mildews. That's why you water earlier in the morning. It's nice to do targeted like soaker hoses and drips, but it's a lot of materials. It's a lot of points of failure. It's a lot of systems and things where in the summertime, if I don't have the time to catch those mistakes as they occur regularly, because I'm not in the garden every single day, I can lose an entire crop without even realizing it. And so it's like, it's cost benefit. I'm like, I have less time sometimes, so I have to make these investments to ensure that that time doesn't result in the failure of production.
Any advice for a guy who's got clay soil?
Yeah. What most farms do when they begin to work with a clay substrate is they will bring in some new organic material. You'll literally till in some like fresh manure. Like animal husbandry is a great way of developing new and fresh soil. And then also you'll choose what we call cover crops, you know, just like a broadcasted seed varietal that has really strong root production. And so those roots will literally help you break through that top layer of soil. Things like cereal rye is the thing that most people go to, because its taproot can go 3 feet into the ground, and then it's got all these splinter cell roots that kind of come out. And so it's like when grown in close proximity, it literally breaks up the soil bed for you. It allows what you're putting on top, and then it allows you to till through it a little easier to get that soil closer to what we would say, you know, that loamy structure. So yeah, it's like manures. If you don't have access to a large abundance of manures and you're just looking to cultivate a small space, compost will do the same thing, you know. And I don't just mean compost, I mean compost. You know, it's like you're literally developing a soil layer on top so that the roots can slowly break things down underneath. And you could just ship in more soil, but that's not a sustainable practice. So yeah, it's like mulches, leaves, garden clippings, you know, it's like anything that you can do to just kind of like slowly cook that soil down, add new nutrients, help balance it out a little bit more would be the trick for sure.
Cool. Really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for being on the show, Anthony.
Man, thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Please like, comment, and subscribe. Hit that bell so you know when we put new videos out. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Brain Aqua. This has been AquaBrainTV. Remember to keep your head up and keep those knees bent.